All right, today we're going to go over 2.3 standard form. All right, let's go ahead and answer the first essential question, which is what is the standard form of a linear equation? So let's kind of identify what makes the standard form be a standard form. The standard form of a linear equation is 8x plus by equals c. Now, the standard form, unfortunately, doesn't give us much in terms of graphing, but it is really good to set up word problems. Okay, the only thing that it does give us is the c, which is the constant, and is usually the total amount of something. Okay, other than that, not much use for that form. So that brings us to the second essential question, which is how do you graph a linear equation in standard form? And this is where it gets really interesting because this skill is going to be one skill that you're going to take for the rest of algebra. Super important. So pay attention. So the first example says, what is the graph of 3x minus 2y equals 9? Well, how do we graph this? Before, we were able to find a point and then use the slope to find the rest of the points and then draw our line. In this case, the slope is not given to us. So here's how I want you to graph the graph or the equation. Okay, we're gonna find the x and the y-intercept. Well, check this out. To be able to find the x-intercept of any equation, all you gotta do is you're gonna set y equal to 0 and then solve for x. All right, well, let's try that out. We got 3x minus 2 times y equals 9. And remember, y is now going to be 0. So I'm going to put a 0 there. All right, and then from there, let's just go ahead and solve it. Let's simplify this. Negative 2 times 0, well, that just goes to 0. So that's gone. And I'm left with 3x equals 9. And all I got to do is get x by itself, which it's as simple as dividing by 3. Because remember, we got to do the opposite of what it's doing. All right, well, that's gone. And you're left with 1. So that is x equals 9 divided by 3, which is 3. So that means that you have an x-intercept at x equals 3. So I'm going to go back to my graph, and I'm going to put a point at x equals 3. And remember, we're looking at the x value at the x-axis, the horizontal axis right there. And 3 is right there. So that is your x-intercept. Cool, perfect. Well, the next thing we're going to find is your y-intercept. And your y-intercept, you can find it by setting x equal to 0 and then solve, oops. And then you're going to solve for y. All right, well, let's go ahead and do that. I got 3x minus 2y equals 9. And now instead of x, I'm going to write 0. Cool, perfect. Well, let's simplify this. I know that 3 times 0, well, that equals to 0. So that's gone. And I'm left with negative 2y equals 9. And all I got to do is get rid of that negative 2. So let's do the opposite of multiplying by negative 2, which is dividing by negative 2. And whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. All right, cool, perfect. Well, that's gone because that equals to 1. And I'm left with y equals 9 divided by negative 2, which gives me negative 4.5. So I get a decimal, but it's not a horrible decimal, so that's fine. So now I'm going to go to my y-axis, which is this one right here, the vertical axis, and put a point at negative 4.5. Well, negative 4.5 is going to be negative 4 down and then a half. So about right there. Oops, and I'm actually going to do that with red. So negative 4.5 is right there, which means that that is my y-intercept. And now I got 2 points, which means I can just draw the line. Oops, that's a horrible line. Okay, that's much better. So that is my linear equation. And that is how I want you to graph a linear function when it's given to you in standard form. You got to find the x-intercept, you got to find the y-intercept, and at the end, all you got to do is sketch the line using the 2 points. All right, let's go ahead and answer the second essential question. So how can you relate standard form to horizontal and vertical lines? So the standard form is really good in identifying horizontal and vertical lines. So let's go ahead and answer the essential question. All right. Well, what does the question say? It says, what does the graph of 8x plus by equals c? So basically the standard form. What does it look like when a equals 0? Well, let's check that out. All right. Well, first thing we got to do is simplify that equation because we got 0 times x. Well, what is 0 times anything? 0 times anything is just 0. So that's just gone. That's 0. And you're left with 2y equals 6. All right, well, let's graph them. But we can't graph it until y is completely by itself. So let's get y completely by itself. So I'm going to go ahead and divide by 2 to get rid of that 2. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. That goes to 1. So I'm left with y equals 6 divided by 2, which is 3. Well, notice what's gone. Usually we get an equation that it's in the format of y equals mx plus b. Notice that mx, it's gone. So what does that mean? That means that I have a y-intercept at 3. Okay, this 3 represents the b value, it represents your y-intercept. So let's just go ahead and plot that real quick. I have a y-intercept at 3. So I'm going to put a dot right there. However, if I don't have an m or an x, that means that I don't have a slope, which means that my slope is 0. So if my slope is 0, I'm not going up or down. I'm just a straight constant line, which means that this line is going to look like a straight constant line with a slope of 0. So that's really interesting. All right. Well, what happens when you get the same example in standard form, but then your b is equal to 0? Okay, notice that in the previous example, a equals 0, right? Well, what's going to happen when b equals 0? Well, let's take a look at that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the equation and we're going to simplify this. All right, well, we know that 0 times anything is just 0. So that's gone. And I'm left with 3x equals -6. All right, well, let's simplify that. Let's get x by itself. Well, I'm going to divide by 3 to get rid of that, to get rid of the 3. That goes to 1, and I'm left with x equals -6 divided by 3, which is -2. Well, usually we get an equation that says y equals -2. Well, this is going to look a little different, and here's how you're going to be graphing this function. Because this says x equals -2, that means your slope is undefined. And a line that has a slope that is undefined is going to look like this. You're going to have a point at -2 on the x-axis, and your line is now going to look vertical. And that is how the line is going to look like.